Hey, welcome back to the Orange Couch. We're here today kind of doing something a little bit new. We've been doing devotionals. We've been having worship tutor sessions with our worship leader, Michael Pitts. We've had special guests and things like that. But, one of the things that connected me to Pastor Mark when we first met, first time, was just kind of an interest to hash out theological topics. And this is something that I think good friends in ministry, or just good Christian friends, not necessarily in ministry, do around kitchen tables and dinner tables and restaurant tables and over coffee and things like that. So we thought it would be a lot of fun. This is something we've seen a lot of people do over the last couple of years. A lot of pastors coming together and filming conversations like this. So we thought this would be a good idea for the Orange Couch. So we're going to call these hot topics. And the way we're going to start today is by talking about how you handle talking about hot topics. So welcome Pastor Mark to the couch.
Hey.
He's always leading the thing, having to take a side seat today, a little passenger seat, but it's all right.
That's all right.
Well, what we were talking about before was just kind of explaining how you and me really first met. We were at International Worship Center together in Falkville, Georgia, right outside of Savannah, and you started coming to the church with your family. And then I remember the first day you came to the office, you brought those amazing donuts.
Yeah.
What are those things called?
They were from God. Donna's Donuts.
Yeah, Donna's Donuts.
Yeah, it's non-debatable.
And so we were like, we don't know who this guy is, but he's cool.
Yeah.
He brings donuts. And
Yeah.
so, long story short, you started serving and volunteering, and then God opened an opportunity for you to step into an executive pastor role, which we needed very much at that time. And so you and me started to get to know each other. And at first, really, we'd said, hey, what's up? And we talk a little bit here and there. But one day, I don't remember how we got on the conversation, but we started talking about creation. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were sitting in the office and we started talking about it. We're riding down the road to lunch. We're talking about it. We're just going on and on and on about it. Everybody else around us is just like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember the way this went down was you were basically describing the gap theory, which is a very common theory about creation, the fall of Satan that takes place between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And then I was just kind of giving some thoughts back and forth of why I'm not a gap theory guy. You are a gap theory guy. So kind of explain the gap theory for people who don't really know what that is.
Well, I think, first my thinking was when we started debating is it was fun.
Right.
I was like, I love this.
Yeah.
Because I think debating, I think some people use it this way. They use it to prove how brilliant they are.
Right.
I'm better than you.
Well, that's what I thought you were doing at
Yeah,
first.
well, I am. I am better. But, the reality of what I see, I love debating because it challenges not what you believe, but what I believe.
Exactly.
Because if I can't debate it, I might not really believe it. I mean, that's kind of how I come into it. So I sort of came into that day thinking, oh, he's been to Bible school. Yeah, I've been to seminary. And all of a sudden, here comes the topic up. And I thought, well, heck, I know what I believe. Let's see what you believe. I'm pretty stable with where I am. And so, it wasn't necessarily entering a debate to prove you wrong, as much as sometimes I think debating is to establish my own faith. To challenge me is what I believe even right. And so, I took the premise that day we were talking about creation, and I started talking about, well, I believe in the whole gap between Genesis 1, verse 1 and verse 2. In the beginning God created, and then the earth was formless and void. So I started throwing the whole thing. Well, Jeremiah says God can't create anything empty. He can't create anything void. So it would have had to become empty and void, because God cannot create empty and void. So something had to happen between 1 and 2. And then I went to Ezekiel 28, and I was saying, look, Satan was in the garden. We know that's true, that he was placed in the Garden of Eden, and he was there, and he blew it and led a rebellion. And during that rebellion, darkness covered the face of the deep. We know that's true because Ephesians calls him the prince of the power of the air. He is according to Isaiah, he's the anointed cherub who covers. That's why darkness covers it, because by the time we get to the New Testament, we see darkness, that he is the prince of darkness. And so, my whole point to you was, dude, that's clear. Why? How in God's name can't you see that? You know,
Right.
now that's kind of the way I approached it is, and I felt like I had a pretty good argument going. I was like, let's see you. You know, I mean, I think then it started turning into fun. It just started turning into, and I could see you scratching your head like, yeah, I don't believe this at all. And so, you know, it sort of started out as a fun. This is going to be good. But then I noticed by the time we got into the van, headed off to lunch, we were getting serious into this thing. It's like all of a sudden I saw you amping it up a little bit, and I started going, oh, man, he doesn't believe like I believe. And I'm thinking, well, what I believe is so clear. How can he not see that? And then I saw that this thing was really escalating into a hot topic. I mean, and it's still hot today. I mean, people are going to always debate it. But, you know, I was pretty stable where I felt. I was pretty clear on what my perspective was anyway. I wasn't moving anything from what I believe, but I did notice as we started talking about it, the air started changing a little bit. Give me your perspective on it, what you were seeing.
Well, yeah, it was kind of that, you know, the same way for me.
I mean, you were wrong,
right,
right?
exactly. I was
You were wrong. Okay.
But yeah, being in seminary, one professor that I had, he kind of like really put this out for us. I remember one of my favorite classes, and it was in an eschatology class. And of course, you know, in eschatology, the whole idea of post-trib, mid-trib, pre-trib comes up. So he gave 3 groups of students the topic, and they had to represent that position, even if they didn't believe in it. So they start weighing out the pros and cons. They construct their arguments, and they bring them in front of the whole class. And then it kind of became an open debate where people in the you know, the student body were throwing stuff out in the classroom. And he made it fun. And when you talk about that, you know, arguing, fighting fun, that's exactly what we were doing. And it did kind of escalate, but I think that's really what God would want us to do, is fight fun. You know, it's like more like, I heard a guy one time talk about this, talking about denominations and churches fighting amongst each other, or pastors who don't think the same way on certain different interpretations of Scripture, that we have to fight like brothers rather than enemies. Like when I wrestled with my brother growing up, yeah, it got rough sometimes, but sometimes we would just be having fun, or we would, even now, if we kind of argue and pick at each other back and forth, you know, to somebody not in our family, it may seem like, God, they go for the throat, you know, but we're having fun. We're playing around with each other, being sarcastic. But yeah, on that day, I didn't know you all that well, and I've always enjoyed debating people, because even like now, you know, you'll say, hey, David, you know, or tell that to David, and I'll start kind of throwing out little things, just logical, critical thinking, you know, fallacies, inductive, deductive arguments, things like that. And my immediate thought has always been about gap theory is that it's a post hoc fallacy, that you're basically drawing a conclusion that the Scripture doesn't draw a conclusion on, that you're looking at a set of circumstances and then you basically say, well, then it couldn't be anything else. And my position on that has always been, well, if the Scripture doesn't say it, you know, then you have to call it into question. You know, if there were 2 creations, wouldn't that have been mentioned somewhere? You know, wouldn't have Jesus said, well, you know, Dad did it well the first time, but then the old boy messed up and we had to redo everything. You know, and so we started doing like that, and I started getting a little arrogant. I started getting a little frustrated because you were like, okay, and then you'd come back, and then I'd come back, and I'd come back, and again, everybody else was just kind of like, okay. Right?
You know what I've seen about debating hot topics is, when people go into it with a knife to prove something,
Right.
I'm gonna cut you,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna bleed you out till you die,
Yeah.
and you know, it's kind of like a UFC brawl. I'm gonna beat you down till you submit and you tap out.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people hate debating.
Yeah.
Is I can't sit down and debate with somebody who doesn't believe in tongues, because, you know, typically the guy who believes in tongues is trying to get the other guy to tap out.
Right.
And so we don't really ever hash theology. And I think it's healthy, because I think when you come back to me of, dude, I don't believe that, I don't see it that way. Like you just said a second ago, you know, the Bible doesn't specifically say it, but we deduce it.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing, because we all bring our own glasses to the table, so to speak, the way we see it and the way we may have been raised. But that's what makes brother and sisterhood of Christianity so healthy, because it's nice to have somebody walk up to you and go, dude, I don't believe that.
Right.
Because it challenges me to go back and rehearse it, so that we don't end up with heresy.
Yeah.
We don't end up with doctrine that's now a heresy, or, you know, somebody who just comes up with something off the cuff. So healthy debating back and forth, this is my opinion, I believe it's a lost art. I believe it's a lost art, like the Jerusalem Council, sitting down debating, what are we going to have the Gentiles do?
Right.
Are they, they're going to eat blood or not? But they had to work it out. And I think because of maybe a lot of denominationalism or a lot of egos or a lot of theology that's out there, it's hard for guys to sit down or pastors and really hash out the opposing view.
Yeah.
Because we get nervous. And that's what I told you that day. I said, I'm not scared that you're going to change my mind.
Yeah.
If you do, maybe I really didn't believe it anyway. And furthermore, if you do change my mind, it's a good thing because it means that maybe I was off track a little bit.
Well, and that's what kind of happened that day. I remember I got a little flustered by it, and and I remember that day later thinking, you know what, man, this guy was calm, he was cool, he was nice, and I acted like an idiot. And I really didn't do, like, when I came to you and it was just you and me in the office, and I said, hey, man, listen, I want you to know that if I came across as prideful or arrogant, I did not mean to do that, and you were like, whatever, dude, I didn't feel that way at all, but I appreciate you saying it. And I think that's what we have to do. Just like you said, we have to come to it just for the art of debate, not
Right.
to make the other guy submit.
Right.
This isn't a fight. This isn't a UFC grapple where, if you don't tap, I'm going to break your arm.
Right.
And I love what you said right at the beginning, that being able to debate means you have to think critically about what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in anything, even, where you're presenting a sermon or you're writing a sermon, I mean, you have to consider there are people who oppose your argument. There are people that you
Right.
have to convince, and you have to consider the counter argument. Because if you don't, then like you said, how do you know if you really believe it? If you're
Right.
not really taking into consideration things that other people say that go against what you're saying.
Right.
So that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think the art of stupidity is to think you're always right. I mean, I really do. I think you need to go in believing, but I think you always need to keep here's my opinion about debate. It's why God established authority, because all of us have opinions that can be wrong.
Yeah.
And debating is a healthy thing with Scripture, to be able to sit down with someone with an opposing view who doesn't see it like we see it, on issues that aren't eternal, on issues of drinking, on issues of Calvinism versus Arminianism, or whatever we want to debate, tongues or not, healing or not, is suffering the will of God, all the things that we're going to debate till Jesus returns anyway. I think we've lost an art in Christianity of being able to sit down together and have opposing views and go, dude, that's okay.
Right.
It's healthy. It's nice to know someone else believes differently than I believe, but we both are firm on what we need to believe that's important about Scripture and about Christ and about sin and about eternity and righteousness. But so I'm looking forward to this, this new thing we're doing here on the Orange Couch, to sit down and hash this stuff out, man. I hope it kind of leads itself to one takes an opposing view and the other takes, and we can start hashing out some topics and really talking about, the things that we see happening in our culture that we need to address on both sides, because we do get both sides of the coin. We see, both sides of the coin of what people think about Scripture, and so I hope this turns into a healthy thing. I hope people start seeing that it is okay to sit down and laugh and have a good time and have opposing views of Scripture and go out going, man, that was fun, good fight.
Yeah.
Good fight, and enjoy working the Scriptures and our salvation out.
No doubt.
So I'm looking forward to it, man.
Cool deal. So taken away from this, or what we're taking away from this, should be fight as brothers, don't fight as enemies. Be willing to allow other people to give you a counter argument for what you believe, your interpretation about certain things in the Bible, and then ultimately just have fun.
Yeah.
Just have fun doing it, and love your Christian brothers and sisters. Know that you're both going to heaven together, even if you don't come to the same conclusion about the same thing, and we'll all be all right. Kind of simple. That's kind of a simplification. I know it can get a little more complicated, but I think if you try to follow those three things, you'll be all right.
Looking forward to it. It's
All
going to be good.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Thank you.